Good morning. We've had 2 field trips today, so that was not a very good response. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Did I say today or did I meant this week? It's been a fairly long week here at the museum. So thank you all. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. My name is Erica Stresbeck. I am the Education and Program Manager here at the Cape Cod Museum of Art. A few quick notes, if you could please silence your devices. Emergency exits, again, front and back of the auditorium, and there's a restroom here on the ground level over near the elevators. Your ticket price today includes museum admission, so we encourage you to explore our current exhibitions. Through Young Eyes, celebrating its 22nd year, showcasing artwork by our local Cape Cod students in grades K through 12 throughout the Cape Cod and the islands. Old Yarmouth, Life During the American Revolution is presented in collaboration with the Dennis Historical Commission and the Historical Society of Old Yarmouth in honor of America's 250th anniversary. The Cape Cod Open Invitational is in collaboration with New England Sculpture Society and featuring 44 sculptures across the campuses of the museum, Cape Cinema, and Cape Playhouse. I see the sun out there today, so if you're inclined to take a walk, there's a lot of great things to see. And then opening this evening in the Hope McLennan Gallery is David Phillips' 57 years of sculpture. The team is busy putting up all the finishing touches for the opening this afternoon, but you'll be able to take a peek in there, and it's quite amazing. David's public reception is May 9th, Saturday, May 9th at 2 o'clock. Hopefully you'll come back and join us for that. It's going to be fabulous. There's truly a lot to experience here at your Cape Cod Museum of Art, and we also have a full lineup of classes, talks, and events throughout the year. If you don't already receive our newsletter, I always encourage folks to sign up so that you know what's happening. Today, we're pleased to welcome Cape Cod-based multidisciplinary artist Alla Zbinovsky for a talk exploring Russian icon painting, drawing on her classical training in Moscow in the 1990s and her deep connection to the Byzantine and Russian sacred art. Alla offers a rare inside look at the ancient artistic tradition that remains vibrant in the contemporary practice. If I could kindly ask you to hold your questions till the end, that would be great. But for now, please welcome Alla Zbinovsky.
Good morning, everybody. I see a lot of old friends, new friends, and hopefully future friends. Thank you all for coming on this beautiful spring morning. It's a dark room, but hopefully the icons will lighten up the room a bit for you, and then you'll go out into the sunshine and experience the real light. So my talk is titled Tradition and Transformation in Byzantine and Russian Iconography. What I hope to do is take you through about 2,000 years of in 1 hour. So that's like how many years per minute? I don't know. It's going to be a little bit of a wild ride. So stay with me. Hold on to your hats. So the word icon is Greek. It's actually a Greek word. I have the Greek inscription in the red at the top. It means image or likeness. I can't really start this talk without just paying lip service to how that word is used today in our modern lexicon. We hear icon, iconic everywhere. I think we have icons on our computers as digital symbols. We have celebrities that are called icons. We have cultural values that are called icons. And ideas, people, and things are called iconic. So that word is everywhere. I think it's way overused. And the modern meanings have definitely shifted from religious or historical representations to a very diverse, multi-layered kind of ideas of icons. So we're not doing the modern icons. This is all going to be the old stuff. Oh, I should say that the word icon in Greek is ikona, and it's in Russian it's the same word. It's also ikona. So icon, ikona. So we're going to look at the purpose of Christian icons. They're multi-purpose. They're used in churches, they're used in homes, and they're also used in religious ceremonies. They're considered sacred, and they're used for guidance, meditation, and veneration, and as aids for spiritual contemplation and prayer. An additional sort of very important meaning is they were originally intended for a kind of a visual history to educate the illiterate. So we have to look back to antiquity and the times of the first and second millennia where, most people, unless they were clergy or academics or aristocrats, they didn't know how to read or write. So icons in the form of frescoes or icons made on wooden panels, they were considered to be a visual scripture, kind of a history of the Bible, of the Old and New Testament. Come on in. Hi, Mary. So what are icons? They appear in many forms. They're not just paintings on wood panels like I've displayed here on the left wall. Certainly that's the most prevalent form of iconography. But they are produced on wood panels. They're produced on frescoes, which are wall murals. They can also be on wood or stone relief carvings. One of the things that are not allowed in the Eastern tradition is sculptures. Three-dimensional forms are not allowed. So you will never see sculptures like you see in Catholic churches, in Eastern Orthodox churches, and I'll get to the reasons for that a little bit later. It has to do with a very important concept called idolatry. It harkened back to the golden calf of Babylon that people were bowing in front of. And so sculptures are not acceptable in this tradition. So icons are depictions of spiritual or sacred entities, angels, saints, people, and also biblical events. Here we have a very interesting fresco from the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, or I'm going to call Istanbul Constantinople because that's where we'll be. Istanbul is a very new word. This is in one of the vaulted ceilings of the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. And this is a very cool image, I think. It's a six-winged seraphim. These are the holiest of the angels that sit surrounding the throne of God. So if you have a visitation from one of these, watch out, because these guys are powerful. So now for some time travel. We're actually going to go back to antiquity. And now that we've defined what an icon is and what it isn't, let's turn back in time to the start of the evolution of iconography. So where are we going to begin? What do you think? Yeah. So this is a mummy case with a portrait of a man fixed on top of it. This is a very special time in the 1st and 2nd century AD. There are three worlds colliding at this time. It was this time, this area was called kind of Greco-Roman Egypt. So Greece was kind of waning, Rome was at its height, and Egypt was waning, but they were all there at the same time, all these cultures. And it was a unique time of fusion with Greek artists working in Egypt, which was then a Roman province. And this was a time that Egyptians were still mummifying their dead before burials in tombs. And these mummies there are hundreds of them. They were found in the Fayum River Valley south of Cairo, so they're called the Fayum portraits. These mummies were kind of lying hidden away for 2,000 years, and they were discovered in the 1920s. So the mummies and the mummy portraits were considered to be sacred representations, and they were realistic portraits of people done when they were still alive. And they were meant to accompany them on their journey through the underworld. Moreover, they ensured the deceased identity was preserved for the afterlife. So this would include their physical and their spiritual identity. And the portraits ensured safe passage to the next world. We all know how the Egyptians considered the afterlife to be just as important as the current life. So from this we can kind of look at the next 800 years of Christian icon painting followed these traditions, and I'm going to tell you how. Like, how are mummies related to icons? So these unique portraits were painted using two techniques, encaustic and egg tempera. Encaustic means to burn in, and it involves painting with molten wax and pure pigments. It's going through a bit of a renaissance, this technique here on Cape Cod, of all places. We have a conference every year in Truro with encaustic artists from all over the world. I also teach encaustic painting at the museum here. Some of my students are here. Hello. So encaustic painting was with molten wax, very, very durable. As you can see, these portraits are so well preserved. They still have, I would say, almost their original beauty. So egg tempera is another technique that was used in antiquity as well, and this is a technique using egg yolk, an egg yolk mixture as a binder for pure pigments. And both of these techniques were subsequently used in Christian iconography for the next 2 millennia. So let's now move, we're going to do a lot of geographic travel and time travel here. Let's move east from Egypt, from Alexandria to Judea, which was a Roman province with Jerusalem as its capital. So here we have one of the earliest depictions of Jesus of Nazareth. It's one of the earliest Christian icons in fresco form from the 2nd century catacombs. So as I said before, frescoes are wall paintings, an unusual form of painting because the pigment is mixed in with the plaster of the actual wall. So the painting is the wall. It's embedded into the wall. They're extremely fragile, as you can imagine. They're subject to crumbling. But the Roman catacombs have some incredible examples of early Christian art in fresco form. Part of the reason for that is the climatic conditions in the catacombs were ideal. It was very dry and cool. They were in underground tunnels. So we have Alpha. This particular image, there's an inscription on it with Alpha, Jesus of Nazareth, the Alpha and the Omega, the Son of God. I don't have to tell you all that Jesus was a Jewish teacher, healer, and religious leader, and he's the central figure of Christianity. And Christianity is actually the world's largest religion. I didn't know that. I thought, had to look that up when I saw that. It's the largest religion in the world. So the Roman authorities, after the appearance of Jesus and his followers and all the stories of resurrection and healing and miracles done by Jesus, they didn't accept this new religion run by what they thought were vagabonds. And they didn't accept the monotheism of Christians since they were polytheistic. They were still worshiping many gods and goddesses. You all know, Zeus and Hera and Aphrodite, and renamed from the Greek names to the Roman names. So the early Christians for about 200 years faced persecution by Roman emperors for refusing to worship the multiple pagan gods. Nero and Diocletian were Roman emperors who tortured and killed many Christians, and many were martyred for their faith. And these early Christian martyrs were buried in these catacombs. So here we go. This is a photo from one of the catacombs. Another interesting fact about the catacombs is the early Christians, like the Jews before them, did not cremate the dead as the Romans did. They felt cremation was a pagan practice. They felt that people needed to be buried in their bodies so their bodies could await the second coming of Christ. The catacombs were located in the city outskirts of Rome in a kind of a circle formation. Today they're located 3 miles from the city center. But the actual tunnels were there already. They date back to the pre-Romans, the Etruscans. They actually built them for mining limestone and sandstone. They were actually kind of quarries. So they had very extensive tunnel networks in these areas. And they were way outside the city at this time. They weren't. Now it's in Greater Rome, but at that time it was several miles away from where anything was happening. So now the catacombs become places for commemorating the Christian martyrs and a space for gathering for meals and for worship. This is the very earliest image we have of Mary and Jesus. This is a fresco from the Priscilla catacomb in Rome, and it dates back to the year 250. And it depicts Mary and infant Jesus and the prophet Isaiah, who's pointing to the Star of Bethlehem. Another fresco from the Priscilla catacomb. We see, sorry about the cutoff on some of these pictures. Anyway, that's Jesus, a young beardless Jesus healing a kneeling woman. I should say that these catacombs with early Christian art are not just found in Rome, they're found throughout the Mediterranean basin, in Egypt, in Syria, and Turkey. So it wasn't just limited to Rome, because Christianity had spread to these areas already. Another fresco of a young, unbearded Jesus with lambs and birds, and he's represented here as a kind of an image of a shepherd. This fresco from the catacombs depicts Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden with the tree of knowledge and, of course, the snake. It's interesting that in the catacombs we find these visual scriptures, not just from Christianity, but also from Judaism, from the Old Testament writings. This is also an interesting depiction of Jesus as a young Jesus praying and breaking bread with his disciples. And I found this one to be quite interesting because it's an Old Testament story of Jonah and the whale kind of looks like a dragon. I don't imagine anyone ever saw a real whale. And Jonah looks like he's either being pushed into the whale or pulled out of the whale's mouth. I'm not sure which, but I thought it was pretty charming. So this is a slightly later, this is from the 4th century fresco from the catacombs. It's a rather unusual depiction of Mary with her hair exposed. It's barely covered with a thin white veil. And she's in the Aranta position of prayer, which is this. You'll be seeing a lot of this gesture in subsequent photos. So I like this fresco because it really harkens back to the Fayum portraits that we just saw. In its kind of realistic, more naturalistic depictions, also in the very large eyes. There is an inscription of high and row I'm going to try out this pointer. Does this work? Yay. Okay. High and row. These are Greek letters, which is an anagram for Christ, so Christos. So it's a clear depiction of kind of a marker of what we're looking at. Mary wearing jewelry, and kind of a very, this is probably, to my view, what Mary actually looked like, as opposed to much later representations. She came from the Mediterranean, from a Semitic tribe. She looked like she came from that area, and I find it fascinating that it's, she's more human here, should I say. Very realistic, kind of authentic representation of Mary, and also of Jesus. So now that you've seen some of the earliest depictions of the Christian story, let's look at the visual language that is undergoing development. So it's just all beginning here in the catacombs in Christian iconography. So the symbolic language of icons. You should know that icons were not intended as art, but as a means of connecting heaven and earth. As a kind of a window, and I like to use the word portal, to the divine. So there's no attempt at depicting the world as we see it. Linear perspective is non-existent, or sometimes it's reversed. And when we read an icon, the colors, the garments, the gestures, and the objects, they all offer insights or clues into what is being conveyed. So you should know that iconographers write an icon, they don't paint an icon. Because remember, it's not art. It is art, but it's not art. Sacred art. It's sacred art. And we read an icon. We read an icon. So there are certain clues, there are elements that we need to understand. So before we dive into the real development of iconography a few centuries after the catacombs, there are some antecedents with, especially with halos. We have Buddha is depicted with a nimbus, and which is like a ring of light symbolizing spiritual enlightenment. The Egyptians depicted a disc representing the sun for their sun god Ra, and the Greeks had kind of a halo for Apollo, the sun god, depicted with a halo with the rays of the sun coming out of it. So halos in Christian iconography are done with gold leaf, and they symbolize holiness and also divine light. So halos, again, are all halos the same? Most of them are, except for, there's an exception with Christ. His halo incorporates a cross with the Greek inscription, I am who I am. It's here in the cross, and the base of the cross is sort of behind him. So he forms the base of the cross with his body. So I've always been puzzled by this phrase, I am who I am, or I am that I am. And I've done a bit of reading about it, and it's the divine name revealed to Moses by God in Exodus. And it signifies the eternal, unchangeable divinity of God. So only saints and angels have halos, as I've said. Gold leaf is sometimes used in backgrounds of icons. I've used them in some of my icons here on the wall that you might have looked at. And gold halos and clothing, again, they represent divine light. So, before we launch into looking at many slides of icons and frescoes and mosaics, let's look at the elements of an icon. This will help you understand what you're looking at in this talk. So the first thing that we have are inscriptions. They identify the icon and individual figures, and they're written in the language where the icon is intended to reside. So this happens to be a Russian icon written by my teacher, and these are Russian letters. I don't expect you to read them, but here and here it says Mary Magdalene. The clothing should reflect something of the subject's life. The I'll show you examples of that a little later. Sometimes we have objects, scrolls and books, shields and swords. In this case, we have an oil lamp that Mary Magdalene is holding, and a red egg with the inscription, "Christ is risen." She was the first one to experience the resurrection. It was revealed to her first. And the red egg is a symbol of, the red is the passion of Christ, and the egg is a symbol of the rebirth of Christ, or the resurrection of Christ. Sometimes we have architecture, we could have temples, we could have churches, we could have local buildings. We have natural elements that could include water and mountains and trees and rivers. We have certain iconographic gestures of prayer, pointing, sometimes displaying humility. This is the gesture for humility. And then you should pay attention to the facial features. We have sometimes very large foreheads, which denote wisdom, as do large ears. Saint Nicholas is a good example of that. We'll get to him later. We also have a very strict rule that facial expressions on saints and angels and should be dispassionate, which means not emotional. We're not conveying human emotions here. We're looking at another world beyond our realistic, sort of humanistic world. So let's look at colors, and then before we launch into the big slideshow. So we have white, which is a symbolism of an angelic nature. Blue represents celestial or heavenly natures. Red can be divine fire, also can be the color of hell, or martyrdom. You'll see a lot of the Christian martyrs, you know that they were martyrs because they are wearing red cloaks. And they also have, if they're holding a cross, that means that they were martyred for the faith. As I've said before, gold is divinity or divine light. And green is an interesting color because it represents the Holy Spirit permeating the earthly realm. Dark red or brown is a kind of a related to the earth or somebody's sort of more human nature, and we'll see that a lot in garments. And purple, of course, represents royalty. So, people and angels and saints, they should be identifiable. We shouldn't be staring at something and not knowing what it is. So how do we know what we're looking at? As I said before, first there's an inscription with the name of the person or angel being depicted. This is Saint Panteleimon. It looks like the inscription was worn off. He was a Greek 3rd century saint. And let's look at the elements around him. He's holding a box with tinctures. He was actually a young physician and a healer. He performed miracles. And you can see he's also holding a cross here to show that he was martyred. And this is an old Greek icon that shows scenes from his life along the borders, so that we can understand, what he did to become a saint and why he was martyred. So these scenes, they're kind of hard to see, but they're scenes of healing, people that he encountered, the tortures that he encountered from the Roman authorities. Saint Nicholas. Did you know that he was a 4th century Christian bishop from Myra, which is now in Turkey? We know he was a bishop by the crosses on his garment and also on his sleeve here. He is depicted with a large forehead, signifying wisdom, and his right hand is lifted in a gesture of blessing. He's known for his secret gift-giving to the poor, orphaned young. The story is he saved 3 sisters that were orphaned by tossing bags of gold through their window, and the gold landed in their shoes that were left by the fireplace, and hence the development of, I think it happened in Denmark. Saint Nicholas was popular in Denmark, and that turned into Santa Claus, and him leaving gifts in shoes by fireplaces. So Saint Nicholas is the patron saint of children and sailors. He was not martyred. He's not holding a cross. He's buried in Bari in Italy. He was became a famous, very favorite saint in Italy. This is a very interesting saint, Saint Mary of Egypt. She's more prevalent, iconography of her is more prevalent in the Eastern Orthodox Church than the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church. She was an early Christian desert saint from the 4th century with an interesting story. She's depicted with a kind of a skeletal body in dark red earthy clothing, and she's being blessed by the hand of God on the upper right, coming out of the blue orb. So if you see icons of people in skeletal bodies, that means that they were ascetic saints, meaning they experienced extreme deprivations in their life, and that was part of their spiritual practice. So Mary ran away from home at a young age from Alexandria. She was from Egypt, and she led a dissolute life, which means she was a prostitute. And she followed a bunch of sailors onto a boat. They were pilgrims actually going to Jerusalem, to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And she wanted to know what was going on. She hopped on this boat, and she followed the pilgrims. And as she was about to enter this church, which is one of the holiest sites of Christianity, it's built on the site where Jesus was crucified, she was just held back. She was pushed back by some invisible force. And she realized she had to repent and start a new life, and she retreats into the desert and leads a life of extreme asceticism. And you can see by her clothes, she's wearing these very woolly, dark kind of garments. And another saint called Saint Zosima is at her feet. He found her in the desert near death, and he started bringing her food, and they learned from each other, and they spent a lot of time together towards the end of their lives. He actually buried her with the help of a lion. So there are some icons of Saint Zosima and a lion, and she was buried actually near the Jordan River outside of Jerusalem. I was there a few years ago, and I couldn't understand what all these lions were doing in icons. There's just lions everywhere in this area, and I didn't know this story. I wish I did. It would have made more sense. Here we have the Byzantine princess Irene. We're going to hear from her a little bit later. We know she's a Byzantine princess because of her jewels, her crown, and we know she's Irene because Irene had long red curly hair. So we'll see those attributes in subsequent icons. So it's important to know that icons should have the physical attributes of the person. They shouldn't be made up. As we said, St. Nicholas has gray hair, a large forehead, a small beard. Irene is depicted with long red hair. If a person was died when they were young, they would be depicted as a young person on the icon, or vice versa, as an older person. So Princess Irene is important because she restored the veneration of icons, which was a major achievement in the Byzantine Empire, and we'll be getting to all that soon. So this one you should be able to read yourself. Who is this? Can you read the inscription on the left? England. Edward, the King of England. Yes, there's more to it, which I can't see without my glasses. So he's wearing a red cloak. What does that signify? Martyrdom, thank you. He's also holding a cross, which signifies martyrdom. And in his left hand, he has a sword. So swords don't necessarily mean that that person was a soldier or a warrior. They can depict, they kind of more allude to someone being a spiritual warrior rather than an actual soldier or warrior. So King Edward was the King of England from 1042 to 1066, and he was known for his piety, his peaceful reign, and he was the last Anglo-Saxon king before the Norman conquest, which were the Vikings swooping in from Scandinavia. And he rebuilt Westminster Abbey, and he was killed by his stepmother. It was some grab for power. Those things happened all the time. And he was sainted for his good deeds. Here we have St. Anthony. He's not as common in the Eastern Church as he is in the Western Roman Catholic tradition. He's a 3rd century monk. As you can see, he's wearing a monk's head covering and dark clothing, the dark red again. And he was considered to be the father of Christian monasticism. He was what was called, he started the movement called the Desert Fathers. He retreated into the Egyptian desert to live as a hermit after giving away his massive inheritance. Does anyone know what people pray to him for? Yes, yes. If you've lost something, he's your man. He's your man. This is Saint Procopius. It's quite an ornate icon. It's a Greek icon. He's a 4th century martyr depicted with a sword and a shield, and he actually was a soldier who converted to Christianity after a vision of Jesus on his way to persecute Christians in Alexandria. He served in the Roman military, and his job was basically persecuting Christians. So we can see again he's holding a cross, a sword. We have a shield here, and Jesus at the top with archangels and other people connected to his life. He was a pretty popular saint in Greece. He still is. These are my favorite saints. These are what are called the stylite saints. They lived in very high places. Many of them lived on top of columns. As we know, if anyone's traveled to Greece or Rome, these columns are still standing there. They're just like ruins, right? And sometimes they lived in trees. They would climb on top of trees and grow very long beards. So they subjected themselves to the elements, so they would have been up there day and night. They were considered to be the most extreme ascetics. And the one that's most well known is Saint Simeon, who's right here in a basket. He would tie himself into the basket and just pray and live on top of this column. And they lived this way to get away from people and practice uninterrupted prayer. So they found people too distracting. But despite removing themselves, they were often visited by people that wanted advice or their blessing. And even kings and princes were known to visit them to seek advice about whatever they needed advice for. How did they survive, you might ask? They would hoist, people that were venerating these saints would hoist rope and pulley baskets of food and provisions to them. But there are stories of them being in horrible shape by the end of their lives because they were scorched by the sun and pelted by hail, and they were just, subjected themselves to extreme asceticism. Another ascetic is St. John the Baptist. He's also known as the forerunner. In other words, the one that kind of pre-imagined Christ? No, preempted Christ, maybe? He's also known as the angel of the wilderness. Here again, we see him depicted with a skeletal body and very coarse, dark clothing. He's got matted hair, and he's holding a cross. We all know the story of St. John the Baptist having his head cut off by, that's a long story, we won't go there. So he's the patron saint of converts, tailors, printers, and builders. Don't get the tailors, because he's not very well dressed. But Saint Dimitri is a very ubiquitous Greek saint. He was also a 3rd century Roman military officer. He's depicted with the shield and a cross. And he was martyred for converting many pagans to Christianity. So another Roman sort of soldier who converted and then tried to help Christians survive. So he's now the patron saint of a wonderful northern Greek city called Thessaloniki. So we've seen a number of icons from the early Christian era. So we're now still in this era of the 200s, the 300s, with these early ascetic saints and warrior saints. Now we're going to move into a new time period after the year 300, when persecutions end and Christianity is accepted as the official religion. I love maps, so I think this map really helps with understanding what's happening in this area. So we have the Mediterranean here, and Rome is over here. So the Roman Empire is depicted in red, the Byzantine Empire in orange, and we also have the Arab caliphates and Persia here in the green. So what happens is by the year 300 or so, Rome is in decline and it just gets too big to govern effectively. And Emperor Diocletian decides to split the empire in two. So there's the Eastern Empire, which is the orange, called the Byzantine Empire, and the Roman Empire, which is on the left. So the Byzantine Empire was also known as the Greek Empire, because Greece is sort of right here. But the Byzantine Empire was based in this lovely city here called Constantinople, which bridges Asia and Europe. One side of the city is Asia, and the other side is Europe. So Christianity becomes the official religion in 313, and the first emperor appointed to the Eastern Byzantine part is based in Constantinople. And already at this time, Christianity has spread to many parts of the Roman and the Byzantine Empire. It goes all the way up to, reached Ireland and England and Northern Africa, Egypt, obviously. Up here we have was Ukraine is now Russia. We have the Crimean Peninsula, all around the Black Sea. So these countries today that would comprise the Byzantine Empire are Greece, Macedonia, Serbia, Bulgaria, Romania, part of Poland, and up here we have Armenia, Georgia, all of Turkey, what is today Turkey, and Syria down here. And then this is the Egyptian basin here that we had talked about. And as you can see, the Byzantine Empire is bigger at this point than the Roman Empire. So churches are built throughout this region. Christianity spreads widely due to Roman roads, oddly enough. The Romans were so organized with their roads that this enabled the Christian message to be disseminated very quickly and very widely. And iconography spreads as a means of conveying the Christian message as a visual scripture. And as I told you before, at this time, most people are still illiterate. So we know that the Byzantine Empire is getting pretty strong and powerful. What's happening in Rome? Rome still exists, but it's constantly being raided by barbarians and Goths and Visigoths and Huns, and all those northern tribes are coming down and trying to loot Rome. But things are still happening there. It's not like it's destroyed. So Constantinople becomes the seat of Christianity, and it becomes more powerful than Rome, and it becomes eventually independent of Rome. So this is where we're going to be focused on for the next few minutes right here in Constantinople. So you should know that the Byzantine Empire lasts over 1,000 years, and it's the longest lasting empire in history. It's 307 to 1453. Does anyone know what this is? It's not a very good photo, I apologize. Yeah, the Hagia Sophia or the Hagia Sophia. This is a beautiful church, considered to be the principal church in Constantinople, the seat of Christianity. It's built by Emperor Justinian in 532. It's a remarkable feat of architecture. And it's dedicated to the concept of divine wisdom, which is really interesting. Greek philosophy was still very prevalent at that time, and this idea of not being dedicated to a saint or a person or an angel, but the philosophical concept or the theological concept of divine wisdom. Sophia means wisdom in Greek. And it's one of the oldest still active structures in the world. Of course, it was destroyed a bunch of times by earthquakes and rebuilt. So I'm going to delight you with some of the interior mosaic icons. Mosaics are probably really very highly developed in the Byzantine Empire. Here we have the deesis, which is the Greek word for supplication. If you look at the hand gestures of John and Mary next to Christ, well, Mary's not there anymore, her hands, but Christ in the middle, and holding the Bible and also blessing. This is a gesture of blessing in his right hand. The blessings always happen with the right hand. This is Mary enthroned. She's clad in Byzantine blue. Christ is in gold garments, and you can see the cruciform halo on Christ here. And this is actually the oldest mosaic in the Hagia Sophia, and it dates back to 867. And keep that date in your mind, because there was something that happened before that. So another view of this oldest mosaic, Mary and Jesus perched up into one of the domes of the Hagia Sophia. So why is this the oldest surviving icon in this church, which dates back to the 500s, notwithstanding the earthquakes? Because before this, all the iconic imagery was destroyed by not just by earthquakes, but also by the clergy. So again, note the year 867. So what happened before 867? We had a period of time of about 150 years called iconoclasm. You've probably heard the word, but you didn't know where it was derived from. So iconoclasm literally means the breakers of icons. And Byzantine emperors, there were two of them, Leo III and Leo V. They banned all religious imagery. The reason for this is they invoked the second commandment from the Old Testament, which forbade graven images. So again, we're getting back to the golden calf of the Old Testament. They felt that icons were idols. So they destroyed icons and they persecuted supporters of icons. And this particular fresco shows three bishops whitewashing a medallion of Christ. That's a tub of lime here. So it brings us to the question, were icons worshipped as idols or venerated as representations of the divine? Some of the catalysts of iconoclasm could have been, there was a massive volcanic eruption in Greece in 726, which created a lot of havoc in the Mediterranean world, and people thought that God was angry with the idol worshippers. Tsunamis, ash clouds, loss of life and land, pumice stones rained from the sky. It was very apocalyptic at this time. And this whole region was sort of beset by this idea of God is mad at us. Someone's angry up there, and it must be the icons. There's also another sort of aspect to iconoclasm, we pointed out the green in the map of the Islamic states, the caliphates, which bordered Byzantium. And in Islam, there is the idea which forbids all imagery in their mosques, right? So they would have intersected with the Byzantine world. These ideas would have carried over. So it was a combination of several things. So for 150 years, all images were whitewashed or destroyed. This was the only image in any church that was allowed, the image of the cross, for nearly 2 centuries. There are some reverberations of iconoclasm later in history. We can look at the Great Schism in Christianity in the 11th century that also addressed these issues of icons or sculptures, what's allowed, what's not allowed. And then the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century forbade all imagery in the churches. It was only the Bible and the Word, the Scripture, that was allowed. So though we lost thousands of icons, some were saved and hidden away. And one of the places, one of the biggest repositories of icons from this Middle Byzantine period is St. Catherine's Monastery in Mount Sinai in Egypt. It was built in the 6th century by Emperor Justinian on the site of the burning bush of Moses. And this monastery was so remote that the iconoclasts never made it over the mountains and the deserts to destroy their icons. And there are stories of some pilgrims carrying icons by camels, trying to spirit them away to save them, and they knew that they would be safe there. So we're going to look at some of these icons from St. Catherine's. This is a very interesting encaustic icon. We're back to encaustic, which is again painting with molten wax and pure pigments. This is an icon of Christ as Pantocrator, which means ruler. It's from the 6th century. And you'll notice here, Christ has an asymmetrical face. If you draw a line down the middle, you'll notice something, and then flip the imagery. So if you put 2 left sides together and 2 right sides together, you'll get a very different representation. And here we are. So this is one side, and that's the other. So I don't know if this was intentional. It might have been, but you arrive at 2 very distinct images representing the duality of Christ. So we have on the left, Christ is a human with an expression of compassion. He's also blessing us with both hands, not just the right hand. And then on the right, we have Christ, the divine, as a stern ruler and judge, holding the book of scriptures in both hands. An encaustic icon of St. Peter from the 8th century. So again, back to the visual language of icons, he's also always depicted with silver hair and a small beard, and he's holding a cross. So we know he was martyred. Does anyone know where he was martyred and how he was martyred? So he was the apostle that went to Rome. That was the direction he headed. And the Romans caught him and crucified him, and he said, "I don't want to be crucified like Jesus. Hang me upside down. I don't deserve to be crucified as Jesus was." And he was crucified upside down at the site of St. Peter's in the Vatican. So the church was built over the site of Peter's crucifixion. St. Catherine's also includes some lovely and unique 5th and 6th century Coptic Egyptian icons. So we know that, Egypt was part of the Byzantine Empire. They're stylistically very distinctive from the Byzantine sort of Greek manner. This is an encaustic painting. I think the Coptic icons are very lovely. And here's another one of the Nativity from the 7th century. A lot going on here. We have Mary after giving birth to Jesus, who's in white swaddling clothes with the donkey and I think a cow, some animals. We have angels celebrating the birth, the Star of Bethlehem here. There's a lot going on. We have the 3 kings with their gifts. Down at the bottom we have baby Jesus being washed by the midwives, and Joseph is sitting at the bottom with his head in his hands, looking a little forlorn, with some animals, with some horses, consoling him. He always looks a little forlorn because he didn't really understand how this had happened. Another encaustic icon from about 550, we have the Theotokos. The Theotokos is an interesting word. It means God-bearer or mother of God, and that's commonly used instead of Virgin Mary, which is more a Roman Catholic tradition. The Eastern Church tends to stress her maternity and her motherhood rather than her virginity. So Theotokos means the mother of God, and she's sitting between the saints Theodore and George, both martyrs, as you can see, because they're holding crosses. So Rome was not, interestingly enough, Rome was not affected by this movement and destruction caused by iconoclasm. Icons continued to be written in Rome by Greek masters, and some were transported from Byzantium to Rome to save them from destruction. This is an 8th century most encaustic icon. It's life-size, and Mary is depicted as a Byzantine princess. Look at her garments with the pearls and the crown, she's flanked by 2 angels. And this is actually located in a church of the Santa Maria in Trastevere. If you go to Rome, please visit this icon. I just visited her back in a few months ago in March. It's a beautiful icon. It's not in very good shape, though. This is a icon of Mary and Jesus, which was brought to Rome from Byzantine Crete. It's called the protector of the Roman people. Salus Populi Romani is what that inscription is. It's attributed to St. Luke. St. Luke was one of the evangelists, and he was a painter and a doctor from Syria who actually spent time with Mary in her later years. So he actually encountered her in the physical, material realm. And we'll be looking at several other icons that are attributed to St. Luke. So this icon was carried through Rome to prevent the plague and other pandemics from the 6th century onwards. And in more recent history, Pope Francis brought it out in St. Peter's Square during the COVID epidemic in 2020 for a special prayer service. So it's interesting how icons are continuing even today to have a special purpose. Here's an icon of an icon. So since we mentioned St. Luke being the first and original iconographer, here's an icon of him painting an icon. So about a dozen icons attributed to St. Luke were brought to Rome in the 6th century from Byzantium. This is an encaustic icon of Mary as an intercessor or a go-between between people and God. So we're getting close to the end of the iconoclast period, which lasted about 150 years. And the iconophiles, which means lovers of icons, they finally win in 842. It's finally decided that icons are not idols, and the theological argument for this is actually very interesting. So icons affirmed the incarnation, and what that means is God was made visible through Christ, who incarnated as a human. Therefore, visual representations should be allowed, because it already happened. God wasn't up there somewhere, he was here with us on earth. So icons should be allowed and should be celebrated. Empress Irene, of who we talked about earlier, of Constantinople, was one of the people responsible for restoring icons in churches. Here's an icon of an icon again. So we have this golden age of Byzantine sacred art is being revived, and one of the main formats of these icons are mosaics. Empress Irene is right here with her red hair, with her daughter, and here's one of the icons attributed to St. Luke atop the table. So what's interesting to note is that because Byzantium was such a prosperous and wealthy place, there was a lot of gold used in the mosaics, and you're going to see a lot of gold in the coming photos. Here's a mosaic from the Hagia Sophia depicting Mary and Jesus in the center, and they're flanked by Empress Irene, again with her beautiful red hair, and Emperor John holding a bag of money because it came out of his coffers, the restoration work. We're going to kind of flip to the other side of the Mediterranean now. We're in, of all places, Sicily now. This is one of the best examples of Byzantine mosaics found in the Monreale Cathedral in Sicily. It was built in the 12th century, and it's a really unique fusion of cultures and traditions. We have Byzantine artists, we have Norman architects, which are basically the Vikings, and we have Arab builders. So Sicily was, every 100 years, was taken over by a different nation state, or they had the Byzantines for 200 years, they had the Vikings, they had Arabs, they were just like a melting pot of so many different cultures. So we have, again, Christ as Pantocrator, wearing gold and blue, holding the Bible, and he's surrounded by the 7 archangels, and they're all named. This is Gabriel here. I believe this is Raphael here. I wrote an icon of Archangel Raphael right here a few years ago. You can take a look at that after the talk. Here again is Archangel Raphael mosaic from Monreale in Sicily. One of the most unusual mosaics that I've seen is from Sicily, from Monreale, of Christ seated on a blue orb, and he's creating the sun and the moon and the stars. This imagery wasn't around for a very long time. It was only kind of used for 100 years or so. But it's a beautiful image. So Christ the Pantocrator, again, Christ is a stern ruler in the main dome of the Monreale Cathedral. Above him are Archangel Gabriel gesturing to Mary the news of the Immaculate Conception. Can't really see that in this slide. Oh, it's at the very top, yeah. And then in the corner, oh, here it is, sorry. Gabriel bringing the news to Mary with the beam of light of the Holy Spirit announcing the conception of Jesus. We also, this whole cathedral is just, every inch is covered with gold and saints and apostles and angels. If you go to Sicily, please visit this cathedral. It'll blow your mind. So now we're going to kind of jump back to the east. We're going to go back to Constantinople. And I'll be sharing some more slides of one of the most spectacular and best preserved mosaics and frescoes from the later Byzantine period. So we're now like in the 1200s, 1300s. There's a church located by the western walls of Constantinople called the Harwich Church, and it was kind of commonly known as the church in the fields because it was on the outskirts of the city. Inside this church you'll find almost all of the scenes from the Old and New Testaments. Every inch of wall and ceiling and floor is covered with the scriptures, the stories from the scriptures. And this is what you meet at the entry to the church. It's a mosaic of Christ as Pantocrator. He's blessing us again with his right hand and holding the Gospels in his left. I've always thought this hand is very strange. I spent a lot of time looking at it, wondering why. I guess he's holding a very big and heavy book. So, this church is so joyful. In every dome, there are sunburst kind of medallions, and this is a sunburst mosaic in one of the domes. It's Jesus in the center, and he's surrounded by his ancestors. And if you look at some of the figures, you'll notice that things are a little more fluid. They're a little less rigid and less static from the earlier Byzantine sort of straight up and down, more formal compositions. Here we have another sunburst mosaic from another dome. Mary and Jesus are in the center of the medallion, and she's surrounded by her ancestors as well. The ancestor figures include King David and the kings of the house of David, including Solomon, Moses, Aaron, Samuel, Job, and so on. And the last sunburst is Mary and Jesus surrounded by 12 angels. The archangels and some extra angels. This is and you can see the use of rich color now. We're kind of leaning more into frescoes now because Byzantium is being invaded every decade and looted by the Crusaders also, of all people. They committed some pretty horrible things in Constantinople. So we're leaning more now towards frescoes than mosaics. Mosaics are kind of, they're just too expensive to make. Having said that, here's another mosaic. It's the Dormition of Mary. Dormition means sleep. Dormir in French is sleep. She did not die according to the tradition. She went to sleep. And we can see a blue mandorla enveloping Jesus, and in the mandorla are the archangels. And Jesus is holding the soul of his mother in the form of a swaddled baby, and taking her up to heaven. You can see that the mosaic is grounded in green, representing the earth, and Mary's bed is cloaked in the color of royalty, so she's buried in a purple, or she's gone to sleep in a purple bed. And here we have bishops recognizable by their crosses, some saints recognizable by their halos, and it's a very, as you can see, it's changing from the earlier Byzantine compositions. There's a lot of color. The people are more dynamic. They're not rigid. They're moving. You can sense a certain dynamism here. And at the very top, I forgot to mention, we have the six-winged seraphim, which is considered to be one of the highest angels in the hierarchy of angels. All right, so I want you to spend some time looking at this, because this is pretty spectacular. As I said, frescoes are coming into their own in the early 1300s. The best examples and the best preserved examples are here in the Harwich Church. we're looking at a beautiful kind of ballet unfolding red wheels. So we're back to this icon, which you should have seen when you walked in this morning. This is the Holy Trinity, also considered to be probably the pinnacle of Russian iconography attributed to Andrei Rublev. I'm going to spend a few minutes discussing this icon. I hope that's okay. So we have here the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit in that order. Father, Son, Holy Spirit. It's a representation of one divine nature and three distinct persons seated around a table containing the Eucharistic cup of sacrifice. So this is what's called a New Testament Trinity, and it's based on the Old Testament story of the visitation of Abraham by three angels at the Oak of Marmara. So God the Father is clad in divine colors, blue and gold. This has actually been restored, so it doesn't look as gold, but it was gold. The Son of Man is clad in the color of earth and humanity, so we have the dark red and the light blue. He's bowing to the Father as a gesture of accepting his mission of sacrifice. He's also blessing the sacrificial cup, which is the Eucharist. I think there's like a calf there in the cup. The Holy Spirit is interesting because no one has really depicted the Holy Spirit. Sometimes it's depicted as a dove. But it's a heavenly blue angel clad in the color of nature and life, green. And behind the Father is a building, which is Abraham's house. And the Oak of Marmara is behind Jesus. It's not just representing the Oak of Marmara, it also can be seen as the tree of life and also the wood of the cross. So it harkens to the crucifixion. The mountain behind the Holy Spirit represents the spiritual ascent of man. Another interesting thing, I mentioned this idea of perspective in the beginning, but Rublev used what's called inverse perspective, where objects don't diminish in the distance, and the figures are arranged to draw the viewer into the scene. And what it implies is a kind of invitation for the viewer to join the communion. So the vanishing point of this icon, you all know about vanishing points with perspective, right? They go into something in the distance. The vanishing point of this icon is not within the icon. The vanishing point is the viewer. So you can't see that well here, but if you look at the table and the chairs, they're going like this, towards us, rather than away from us. So, Andrei Rublev, back to the iconographer. If anyone's interested in learning more about this time period and Rublev's life and iconography, there's a film, and it's called Andrei Rublev by a very famous Russian filmmaker called Tarkovsky. It's an art house film. It's very long, and it has some incredible scenes. I won't go into it, but if it ever comes around, you can probably find it on YouTube. So I'm going to talk very quickly about the purpose icons served in the lives of Eastern Europeans. We can generalize to Serbia, Bulgaria, Romania, Macedonia, Cyprus, Greece, and Russia, and Belarus, and Ukraine, and so on. So icons accompanied a person from birth to death. They were originally made for a baby on a panel that was the exact length and size of the newborn. So they were custom made. And normally when a child was born, they would receive this icon of either the guardian angel, which is depicted here, again holding the soul of the child, Or sometimes they were given an icon of their saint. So if they were called Mary, they would get an icon of Saint Mary, and so on. On their wedding day, a couple was presented with new icons by their parents to start off their new homes together. And upon death, people were buried with their birth icon. So that birth icon would be placed on their chest. In homes, icons were placed in the eastern corner, usually in the kitchen, and they were venerated throughout the day. The idea was every time you passed an icon, you would have to cross yourself. Candles were lit, prayers were said, and if guests arrived into a home, they would first greet and venerate the icons before they even greeted their hosts. So that would be the first place they would head. Where are your icons? They would touch them, they would kiss them, they would make the sign of the cross in front of the icons, and then they would say hi to the hosts. It's true, I've seen this. It's still in action. This is my little icon corner in my house in Cape Cod. Some of you may have seen this. So moving on to churches, there was a uniquely Slavic phenomenon, and that was the iconostasis. It was this arrangement, it was a screen or a wall separating the altar from the nave, a vertical screen, and icons were assigned to different rows according to their type or their hierarchy. So you usually had the local saints somewhere in the middle, angels at the top. And this is an example of a very large floor-to-ceiling iconostasis in Romania. You can see, people down here and the height, right? So these icons are all life-size, This was a uniquely kind of Slavic phenomenon in churches. They were also decorated with silver protective coverings and jewels, especially in churches. Basically to protect the icon because they would have been kissed and touched, and it was easy to clean metal after the service than to clean the wood on the icon. So only the head and the hands and the feet were visible. Do you recognize this icon? Mm-hmm. What is it? Yes, thank you, Sharon. The other thing icons were used for were not just in homes and churches, but they were deployed in religious processions. They were brought out before battles. This is a painting of a ceremony held in a battlefield before a confrontation with Napoleon and his troops in 1812. So you can see this giant icon being brought out in 1812 and the soldiers kneeling and praying, getting ready to fight. And here's a photo of Tsar Nicholas II up here holding an icon, greeting his troops who are all kneeling during World War I. He's blessing the troops with this small icon of Christ. This icon holds a really special place in Russian history. It's called the Kazan Mother of God. It's one of the many miracle-working icons that was used for over 6 centuries in different capacities. In the 14th century, this icon was brought out at the final decisive battle with the Tartar Mongols. And in the 20th century, you all heard of Stalin in World War II? Well, Stalin closed down, obviously, all the churches, religion was banned, but when the Nazi invasion happened, he actually reopened churches and brought priests back from the prisons. His generals were all in prison too. He brought them back as he needed them to fight the Nazis. So he reopened the churches and he allowed services to be held, and he ordered this icon to be flown in a circle around Moscow in a jet to form a kind of protective ring around the city. It also traveled on top of a tank commandeered by his generals in a ring around Moscow. And the Nazis never crossed this ring. They did not make it into Moscow. So now let's look at special purpose icons. We have a variety of icons used for different things. This is an icon, an interesting one called the Unfailing Chalice. And this was an icon that alcoholics and heavy drinkers would pray to. So it's, yeah. We have, again, St. Nicholas the Wonder Worker, and we've talked about how he was the patron saint of children and travel. People would kneel before this icon before going on a trip. We have St. Simeon the Stylite, again, who was the pillar hermit. He was the patron saint of fasting. And guess what? For those who had antisocial disorders, they would ask for help. We have again Mary Magdalene, who was the patron saint of converts, pharmacists, perfumers, and hairdressers. She had beautiful hair, as you can see. And there's a story of her washing Christ's feet before the crucifixion with oil in her hair. So hair was important. Okay, so I'm ready to conclude, and I wanted to just say a few more things about where iconography is today. Is it dead? Is anyone painting icons? Where, how, when? I visited New York City back in 2020 during the pandemic, and it was the Black Lives Movement. This is a contemporary icon of Mary, a black Madonna, or Black Mary, with her hands raised in the Aranta prayer pose. But it's also kind of alluding to the gesture of surrender. So the target, the black boy in the middle with the target on his chest, also praying or surrendering, one or the other. And this is a complicated icon done by Vladislav Andreev, who is a Russian emigre who lives in New York. He was one of my teachers. A lot of complex symbolism here. We've got a blue circle inside a red rhombus, inside an orange and red circle. He's very cosmic. His compositions really take iconography to another level. Embedded are 7 archangels. Here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and the 4 evangelists in these red corners. And then we have Old Testament prophets in the corners here. So stunning, stunning work. And I'd like to end the presentation with the icon that I began with of the Trinity, and this is also written by Vladislav Andreev. You can see the inverted perspective better here, what I was saying about the table and the footstools, and what Andreev does that's so interesting is that he really makes icons very joyful. His compositions are tweaked from the old icons, and he takes color to a completely different level. I think that's it. Thank you very much. Oh, I didn't go that much over. I'd love to hear some questions if you have any.
Sarah?
Hi, Sarah.
So how did you get into office?
Oh, I was worried somebody would ask that.
Yeah, you can shorten the story.
Okay, so I grew up among icons. I'm Russian Orthodox. I grew up outside of New York City, so I was always surrounded by icons. Never really understood them. And in 1988, I went to the Soviet Union. I went back and forth to the Soviet Union and Russia 3 times. And when my children were small, for work and my husband's work, and when my children were small, I had to get out of the house. And I found a group of international women painters that were studying iconography. So I joined them. It took me 3 years to get into the group. I got on my knees in front of the organizer and I said, does someone have to die for you to let someone into your group? Because they were a very close-knit bunch. And I finally got in and it basically took off from there. So I started in 1997. And I continued studying after I left Russia with this group that traveled to, we met in Greece, we met in Serbia, we met in Macedonia for workshops. And today I work out of my studio. It's one of the things that I practice in Harwich. So, and these are all my icons, by the way. Some of them, it's not all of them. So,
Thank you.
the short answer. Yeah.
Alex, which one is your favorite, and how long will it take you to write one?
Oh my, you don't want to know. So egg tempera is a very painstaking technique. It's a lot of very thin layers or glazes with light pigmentation, but it's a beautiful luminous technique that creates some depth and luminosity and richness of color. So I would say, 60 hours, 70 hours of work. And it's very painstaking work. A lot of the work is done with a brush that's like got one bristle on it, But it's very contemplative, and you can't really be doing anything else. I can't be doing my oil paintings or anything else. It's a very focused kind of meditation. And my favorite, I like all of them. Yeah. Although I have a soft spot for St. George and the Dragon. I love the white horse. And I love the Annunciation, the Byzantine sort of kind of full figures of Gabriel. I included the sun and the moon and the stars here based on the frescoes that I saw. Hi, Marietta.
It was just St. George's Day, I think, a couple of days ago.
I think you're right. Yeah. Yeah. Oh.
Speaking, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
Speaking of Byzantium, you did not talk about Ravenna, Italy, and
I didn't. I wanted to, but this
Okay.
was getting so long. Ravenna was an outpost of Byzantium and has the most incredible mosaics, very early mosaics, that you won't find anywhere else. There are depictions of Christ and Mary there that are just so unique. Yes, Sicily was an outpost, as was Ravenna, which had great trade routes. It was a very rich.
If you go to Ravenna, so Bologna, you're pretty close to Ravenna.
Yes, it's a little out of the way. There's no direct trains there. Yeah, I was there a few years ago. Yes.
What are some of the paintings, the halo, whatever you call the thing behind the head?
Halo, yeah.
Extend, it's called what?
Halo.
A halo.
Yeah.
Extend beyond the frame. What's
Oh, it's a kind of just a decision to, I don't know, sometimes I have a few icons. Oh, maybe this one with Christ's feet coming out into the frame, his little feet. I just think it kind of, it's a way of completing and not isolating the borders, to stretch out the composition. Yeah, it's not always done. It's a stylistic decision. Yeah. Yes, Lydia.
Is the use of the term to write, not icon,
Yeah.
rather than paint,
Yeah.
is there a connection between that and efforts to keep the icons safe from, to be misunderstood as things to be idolized?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that. But yeah, because it was a form of visual scripture, and you write scriptures. So it's not a painting, it's more a visual representation of the written word. But also, I should add that in Russian, to write and to paint is the same word. Pisать икону, which is pisать картину. So I know it sounds a little awkward in English to write an icon rather than paint an icon. It's a little strange, but yeah,
It's fascinating.
yeah. Yes.
Is it always confined to religious symbolism? It has to be.
Yes. The short answer.
So
I mean,
you can't make anything that's different.
you can if you want to. No one's stopping
you.
you.
Don't want to.
I don't want to.
You wouldn't want to.
You wouldn't want to. Yeah, it holds a very special sort of place as sacred art, right? I mean, you could use gold leaf and egg tempera and work on a wood board, but if you're representing a sacred image, then, yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for coming, everybody.